I want everybody to really start really getting a grip on. And coal with clean technology is not as bad because it's the particulate matter that's the pollution, not the CO2. Plants love CO2. Let's go after the particulate matter and get it cleaner. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you there. And I think, as you always talked about regulation through legislation, this is a quick, easy way to remove that. What's going on, everybody? Welcome into a special Saturday, March 22nd, 2025 edition of the Daily Energy News Beat. Stand up. Appreciate you guys tuning in for this weekly recap where the team goes ahead and just throws together some of the top stories from the week. A lot happened this week. Fed decided to keep rates the same. All the stuff going on with the Trump administration. So action-packed week. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I am just going to quickly give a quick shout out. Subscribe to our news Substack, guys, theenergynewsbeat.substack.com. You can hit the description below for all those links. Check out sponsor of the show, Reese Energy Consulting. We love those guys. If you're getting screwed on your marketing contracts or you're building an LNG facility, call Reese Energy Consulting. They're the go-to people for that. And if you want to become Billy Bob Thornton from Landman, invest in oil.energynewsbeat.com. Guys, promise you, get some monthly distributions, save money on taxes, never too early to start saving and thinking about 2025 taxes, and obviously become Billy Bob Thornton from Landman because it's sweet. But I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to the team to queue up some stories, guys. We will take tomorrow off, and we will be back in the chair on Monday. We'll see ya.
EPA unleashes 31 actions to overturn Biden and Obama era regulations, boost American power. This is following up on President Trump's commitment to cut consumer energy or the energy prices by half. Now, how he defines that is yet to be seen. But listen to this. We're driving a dagger straight into the heart of the climate change religion to drive down the cost of living for American families and unleash American energy to bring auto jobs back to the U.S. and more. This is really important because it's going to go after, Michael, is reconsidering its risk management program, the RMP rule. RMP, yes, that is correct. Rule claiming the press release that rule made America's oil and natural gas refineries and chemical facilities less safe. That rule is about really the core mission. And what they're trying to say is that fossil fuels are bad because of CO2.
Yeah.
That's what it's all coming down to. Is CO2 a pollution? Well, CO2 is actually plant food. Now, is it the particulate matter? And this is where I want everybody to really start really getting a grip on. And coal with clean technology is not as bad because it's the particulate matter that's the pollution, not the CO2. Plants love CO2. Let's go after the particulate matter and get it cleaner. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you there. And I think, as you always talked about regulation through legislation, this is a quick, easy way to remove that. We've already seen with the Chevron, the overturning of Chevron deference that, these deregulation aspects are going to be much more helpful from the EPA. I love this quote here, how the EPA touted it will be the biggest deregulatory action in U.S. history, vowing to give the lower cost of living for Americans and, quote, give power back to the states to make their own decision. I can't argue much with that. Love that.
No, in fact, we're going to see that your vote matters in your states. And as the education departments come back to the states, as your energy policies go, you will see the states that succeed will be anybody other than New York, Delaware, New Jersey, California, because follow the energy policies and follow the money. Will Trump use the Federal Reserve as leverage too? I thought this was an interesting article from normally a left-leaning publication from Christopher Smart, the Arbuthnot Group. It is very interesting when you can consider the only institution can create dollars is the Fed, which was established in 1913 and has established swap lines for federal banks that have been critical in meeting sudden demand for dollars and calming global financial markets in time of panic. Here's the problem, Michael, and as we go through this, there is a unwillingness of the Fed to be audited. They do
Yes.
not want to be audited. And I think that you're seeing as President Trump sets up minerals, he sets up the gold. There has been more gold coming into the United States than in the history. Is it because they're about to do the audit on Fort Knox? Is it because he's looking at going back to a different standard and get rid of the Fed? All of President Trump's actions are aligning to get rid of the Fed, a privately held company that is printing US dollars should go away, in my opinion. And that's what I think we're seeing. That's why this article is pretty important. And I thought it was pretty important from a left leaning side of the fence.
Yeah, I mean, when you my only issue is that if you use the Fed as a weapon, that we've seen what happens in the financial crisis when you try to use the Fed to backstop bad policy, you end up in the situation where, I mean, the inflation that we saw from 2015 or really 2020 to now is solely due to what they did in retrospect in the financial crisis. So getting it,
Mostly.
having the executive branch too involved with the Fed defeats the purpose of the Fed, in my opinion.
But there are a lot of things that we can do on this, and you can't. Why tax us if you can print money? That's why you sit back and kind of go, you don't need my money if you're just going to go print money. So you got to get back to how we, before 1912, how we had so much wealth. After 15 years of operation, Germany's first offshore wind farm being scrapped. There's going to be a lot more of those. Closing arguments set to begin in pipeline company's lawsuit against Greenpeace. We're going to be following this because Greenpeace really did disrupt business and cause some serious problems. Anhua Ocean Evergreen inks a $1.6 billion deal for 6 LNG powered container ships. This is huge, and it is a trend that is going on around the world for LNG powered equipment. Wall Street braces for oil in 60s range on tariffs, OPEC plus risks. This is from a Bloomberg article. Trump says he'll speak with Putin. The day I'm filming this is on Monday, and he's supposed to be talking to them on Tuesday. George McMillan and I, after we find out what he talks about, will be recording another podcast with solutions and hurdles, possibly covering some hurdles there. So, with that, let's get to our first story here. After only 15 years of operation, Germany's first offshore wind farm being scrapped. Germany's Alpha Vetus offshore wind farm in operation for 15 years will be dismantled due to unprofitability after subsidies were expired. It has become too unprofitable to operate without massive subsidies. According to Blackout News, a decisive factor for dismantling the Pioneer project is expiration of generous subsidies made possible through Germany's EEG Renewable Energies Feed-In Act. The subsidy meant that the Alpha Ventus wind farm got 15.4 cents per kilowatt hour after being put in operation. Now that the subsidy is run out, the wind farm operators received only basic tariff of 3.9 cents per kilowatt hour, making the farm unprofitable. Here's the bottom line. This is going on around the world. And when you take the soft money or the maintenance dollars out of it, you're talking some serious problems with quote unquote renewable and wind and solar. Here's the big problem coming around the corner, and that is who's going to do the land reclamation cost, because it has been proven that they cannot be installed from day one with profit, and then if they had to tag on the land reclamation for each wind farm or each solar panel, they would not be doing it. So we're about to have a welcome to Rut-Row in the world of renewable, non-sustainable energy around the world. Who's going to pay for it? So buckle up, hang on. Trump says he'll speak with Putin on Tuesday on Ukraine peace push. I applaud President Trump for overcoming almost every obstacle, everything from being shot to now becoming president to now having all the information that was removed from all of his team members. His team member is still kind of fighting this unarmed battle, going up there trying to have a peace talk, so to speak. A lot of land is a lot different than it was before the war, President Trump told reporters. We'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants, and that's a big question. That is the nuclear power plant built by Russia in Ukraine, and it is being controlled by Russia. And I'm sure it is going to be on the talking points because that is one of the key power sources for Ukraine. There is a lot, and it's a complicated process. And so we hope it's a great conversation, and we'll have more on that tomorrow. But it should be very interesting. This was out of a Bloomberg story as well, too. President Trump and President Putin conclude their phone call as U.S. pushes a ceasefire. President Trump on his Truth Social post says, my phone conversation day with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed to immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure and an understanding that we will be working quickly to a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine. This war would have never started if I were president. Many elements of a contract for peace were discussed, including the fact that thousands of soldiers are being killed, and both President Putin and President Zelensky would like to see it end. That process is now in full force and effect, and we will hopefully, for the sake of humanity, get the job done. Well done. I still think President Trump is fighting an uphill battle, needs some help there. But when we take a look at Bloomberg put out there in their article, European leaders fear that the U.S. may cut a deal without them. They're a little late to the party because they're wanting a war and they're not wanting it stopped. Putin wants a halt in arms sale before agreeing to pause. And I kind of agree with President Putin on this from the standpoint that he doesn't want us rearming the Ukrainians only to then throw away the time and let that be a time for them to redo it. But if he is doing it in good faith and he stops bombing everybody and stops the killing, I can agree and think that it would be a good thing. So that is a tough call. I don't have a really good opinion one way or the other on that. But hey, we're following it, and we hope for the best, and we hope to have it end soon. The big thing about ending this soon is that all of the other articles and the traffic and chatter that I'm seeing around the world for people wanting cheap Russian natural gas in the EU. They're tired of high energy prices. We'll see how that goes. Let's go to Harold Hamm. Drill Baby Drill needs $80, or as Stu would say, drill baby when fiscally responsible. ESG has actually done a good thing for the oil and gas operators over the last several years, the last decade, and that is that they've been fiscally responsible. And I applaud Harold Hamm. Harold Hamm said that we would need an oil price of around $80 to cover the cost of drilling wells. U.S. Energy Secretary Wright, the administration isn't targeting a specific oil price of oil, but it wants to bring back common sense and pro-energy policies. Chris Wright is the right man for the right job at the right time. And Scott Sheffield broke out and he said the cash break-even price, including dividends, is $50 to $55 for U.S. oil companies, and that $50 is not going to work. It is not going to be incentivizing to increase CapEx budgets. In fact, you will see a drop in rig counts. You will see a lot of folks in there. And I found this from on X, the lines break even oil from 87 different E&P firms, exploration and production firms, sourced from the Federal Reserve of Dallas. And you can take a look. It ranges anywhere from $59 to $70 on those oil and gas firms the 87 different firms that were interviewed on that from the Dallas Fed, the Fed from Dallas, Federal Reserve from Dallas. The Federal Reserve from Dallas has good reporting, and I've always enjoyed watching and reading their reports and stuff. When you go down below that, this is the Shale Pioneer added. When you go below that $50 oil you talked about, you're below the point where you're going to drill, baby, drill. And Harold Hamm is dead on right. It's got to be around that 50. So when we take a look at what I think is happening around the world, Saudi Arabia really needs above $80. They need that $85 and that $90 in order to meet their budgets for Saudi Aramco to pay its fair share of the sovereign wealth fund. So you've heard me talk about this a lot, but they are very influential in the oil pricing area when you take a look at OPEC and OPEC plus. What's about to come around the corner is we're seeing tankers are coming offline and they're being redone for LNG tankers, or steam tankers are coming off and they are being sold or scrapped. And so the dark fleet is really not there for Russia to use Arctic LNG, and it's been hurt. That is the only place that sanctions have hurt in that area. In the gray market, dark fleet, or the sanctioned fleet, that when you take a look at it, there's about 900 tankers that India and China have been buying crude oil all around the world. And so there's a huge area there. So there is going to be an opportunity for the United States and President Trump, if he's listening, to get the shipyard business going, open up an area where we can take distressed tankers and redo them and reflag them under the United States. That would get us light years ahead into the next generation, because we're going to have to be in a situation where we can, in order to export a great U.S. LNG energy outside of this U.S., or propane or butane or any of the other refined products that the other countries want, plastics or any of those kind of things, so that they can build, that is where we're going to make up a lot of the trade deficit around the world, and that's exporting some of those refined products as well too. But we need tankers in order to do it. The Jones Act kills us on this entire process.
Chevron out and black market in the fallout of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. This one is super interesting. So we're going to go back all the way to February 26th. Current U.S. President Donald Trump announced his intention to end what is known as the General License 41. Now, remember, this license was granted in the Biden administration, which allowed Chevron to operate in Venezuela despite the sanctions that were on there. So basically what this did is the U.S. Treasury, this authorized the U.S. Treasury of Foreign Asset Control to create a system to allow Chevron to actually begin producing oil in Iran. There were 4 corporations that would authorize under this General License 41. One of them being Chevron, Repsol, Martul El Prom, which is, you can assume, is a French company, and Eni, and that contributed about 320,000 barrels per day in January, which is about 25% or a little bit over, say 35% of the country's about 1.06 million barrels per day. That's according to PESA, who's the state-owned energy company. There are a bunch of other stuff here. But what's interesting is Trump has now gone in and removed this license. So why was this license here in the first place? We know that during the first Trump administration, he basically shut down all Venezuelan activity and really, in an attempt to economically sanction the Maduro government. I mean, it goes without saying that, most people aren't a fan of what Maduro is doing down there. I'm no fan of what's going on. You could really call it a humanitarian crisis. So the idea was, let's basically ramp down their oil production. Well, what happened was a couple things happened. You saw companies who had interest in Venezuelan oil, really cry foul and say, hey, man, we're losing money over here. You saw a humanitarian crisis as less money started flowing into the country. Now, you could argue that even if money was flowing into the country, would it go down and solve the humanitarian crisis? Probably not. I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out of Venezuela right now is absolutely scary. So the purpose of this license was really to allow Chevron to recoup its debt that it had in the industry while subsequently minimizing cash flows that came to the Venezuelan state. Because what happens was, under these sanctions, guess what? You end up in this situation where the black market takes over. So if Chevron's not allowed to produce those barrels are still going to get produced by PDVSA, and then they're going to go ahead and sell them on the black market. And so the idea with this general license 41, as it's called, was, okay, let's take those barrels that are going to get produced, let's put them back in the hands of Chevron, who's obviously not going to be necessarily handing the cash over to the Venezuelan government. So it's going to minimize the amount of cash flow that flows. All they're going to get, instead of the full barrel value, which is, whatever the net barrel value is, they're just, PDVSA is just going to get whatever royalty that's agreed to by Chevron. They're not going to pay the royalty, but they are going to reduce heavily the amount of cash that's flowing in while allowing Chevron to recoup some of its so-called debt. I'm not of the camp that Chevron needs to worry about its Venezuelan debt, in my opinion, but that was the idea. Keep oil flowing. If you go through Chevron, it gets out of the Venezuelan government's hands. You reduce their net cash flows because, as Stu has talked about tremendously, the dark fleet then takes over and fills the void. Obviously, even with that, those barrels are still going to produce. And so what we saw happen really in 2020 through what we really saw was that there was a huge increase in the amount of dark fleet. We saw oil, Venezuelan oil minister Tarek El Asami, according, I'll read straight from the article, flourished under the strictest of sanctions. And in March in 2023, it was leaked to Reuters that PDVSA had $21.2 billion in unpaid bills from intermediaries. And this guy managed the oil sector from 2020 to 2023 when this scandal was uncovered. Basically, what he did was he constructed this wildly opaque system to produce and sell Venezuelan oil on the black market. And in doing so, he ramped up output from about 400,000 barrels to about 750,000 barrels when he was forced to resign. All of these transactions were carried out in cash and crypto, and they were able to divert billions of dollars from what was due to, the Venezuelan state relative to hopefully eventually get flown down to its citizens. We know that really wasn't going to happen, though, and stayed in this guy's crony hands. The hard part is, now this with, and so the idea of this, the goal of this general license was to attempt to reduce that, and eventually did. In March of 2023, he got kicked out. But it's this infamous gray market that happens. We know China has come in and bought a bunch. I'll read straight from the article. PDVSA still exports part of its crude to Malaysia, where it's rebranded and then sent on to China. There's this book written in the book called "On Sanctions in Venezuela." Economists Astrubal Ovarius and Juan, gosh, I'm going to butcher this last name, Juan Palacios, showed that in 2023, the U.S., Spain, and India represent 34% of Venezuelan oil exports, while China and Malaysia took 51.6%. And in 2024, their shares virtually inverted. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that General License 41 is helping, because now instead of it all going on the gray market, it's all going to U.S., Spain, and India, which are the cash flow mainly is going to those companies. So it's going to be interesting. This is. I understand what President Trump is trying to do. I mean, obviously what he's trying to do is cripple the Iranian regime. Now, the question is the sanctions actually the best way to do it? Stu has come on this podcast plenty of times and said sanctions don't work. And so we will really see how this plays out. I'm interested to see how this plays out. And to be honest, I don't know. I see both sides of this. If you had to ask me to stick my neck out for an opinion and say what side do you fall, I actually think that allowing these companies to export their oil, keep it, and reduce the amount of cash flow going into Venezuela is good. Now, the problem is that only going to make the people of Venezuela suffer worse. And really where I come from is, what can we do to relieve the suffering going on in Venezuela? So we will be very interested to see how this plays out, and we will be following this tremendously.